Hi, eighth graders. In the last video, you saw me complete a slide that's right here on your screen. It is my completed thesis statement and supports. So this slide was in the last presentation. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to work with the information that's on that slide and develop it into an introduction for my essay. All right, so what I did was I copy and pasted the information from the slide and I put it right below it, right down here. And then underneath this, I made myself an introduction checklist. All right, so I'm going to check off the things that I have done already and what I've still got to do. All right, so in my introduction checklist, it says I should hook the reader with a question, fact, or statistic. I have not done that yet. I should name the text and the author. I haven't done that. Share a big idea, truth, or realization about the world we connected to in the text. That I believe I have done through my thesis, so I'm going to check that. Briefly summarize the text. I'm not really sure if I've done that yet, so I'm not going to check it. And name our thesis and supporting reasons. That I definitely have done. Okay, so I have done 2 out of the 5 things that I need to do for my introduction. So I'm going to go back up to the text that I have, and I'm going to continue working on it. In fact, I'm going to go in front of it because the things that I need to do, at least a couple of them, really should come before my thesis and my supports. Okay, so one of the ways that we can hook the reader in is by either asking a question, including an interesting fact, or including a statistic. People love to look at numbers, so statistics are great if you can find those. I chose to ask a question, so I'm going to start my introduction with a question, and my question is, what does it take to be first at something? Okay, because since Ruby Bridges was a first, I thought that it would be interesting to look at the qualities that make someone ideal for being first at something. Okay, now another thing I know I need to do is I still need to name my text and the author. So I'm going to continue right here and do that in the next sentence. In Through My Eyes by Ruby Bridges. Ruby is the first to attend a formerly all-white school in her neighborhood. Okay, so I have named the text. It's called Through My Eyes, and I have said that the author is Ruby Bridges, so those are more things that I can check off my list. I'll go back through those at the end so that we can check them all off. I want to underline my book title here. And I need to at least say a couple words about what this text is about. I don't want to give a huge summary of the book because I'm going to be talking about what's in my thesis statement and supports, not really about the whole book. But it is good to give your reader some idea of what you read about. All right, so I'm going to just talk about some of the history where in the 1950s, Southern schools were segregated. When this practice was outlawed, remember 1954, Ruby was chosen to be the first to integrate school in her neighborhood. Okay. All right. So that's just a little tiny bit of a summary, and that's really all you want in the introduction. You don't want it to be too long at all. Okay. So I'm going to go down here and see if I can check off some more items that I have done from my list here. Okay. So one of the things one things I needed to do was I needed to name the text and the author, and I did that. I said the book that I was working with was Through My Eyes by Ruby Bridges. I also hooked the reader with a question, and I briefly summarized the text. Okay, so I think I'm really pretty good. I have named my thesis and my supporting reasons. So I think that I am in good shape in terms of covering everything that should be in my introduction. The only thing is, I'm still not completely done because if you notice, I still have my supports in bullet form, and I need to get that changed into sentence format so that it flows with the rest of my writing. Okay, so I'm going to keep going here, and I'm going to see if I can just fit this in directly. Let's see. If I go from that sentence, Ruby was chosen to be the first to integrate the school in her neighborhood, to Ruby had many qualities that made her just the right student for the daunting task of being the first to integrate a white school. Okay, so now I'm going to take these bullets out, and I'm going to say, I think I'm going to start with her name instead of she. I'm going to say Ruby was smart, one of the only Black students to pass the admissions test for white schools. Okay, so I'm going to make that into two sentences instead. So Ruby was smart, period. And then she was one of the only Black students to pass the admissions test for the white schools. Okay, all right, next one. Ruby was also brave, period. I'm going to put there. And then I'm going to take that dash out, and I'm going to say she endured months of terrible treatment by the protesters. Okay, now I'm noticing here I have this blue underline, and that's because I used the word was twice. Okay, so I'm going to take that out here. She endured months of terrible treatment by the protesters. They were shouting terrible things at her and even throwing things at her day after day, yet she held up her head and went to school. Okay, I've got one more bullet here. Ruby was resilient, period. And then instead of saying her name twice in a row, the next sentence I'm going to use she. Went through difficult times. She couldn't eat or sleep at times, yet she kept going to school. She never missed one day the whole year. So the last thing that I would suggest that you do once you've covered all the pieces on that checklist that you need to include in your introduction is reread your introductory paragraph and see how it sounds to you. Is there anything that you want to change or add to it before you start moving on to working on your body paragraph? So I'm going to read this right here. What does it take to be the first at something? In Through My Eyes by Ruby Bridges, Ruby is the first to attend a formerly all-white school in her neighborhood. In the 1950s, Southern schools were segregated. When this practice was outlawed, Ruby was chosen to be the first to integrate the school in her neighborhood. Ruby had many qualities that made her just the right student for the daunting task of being the first to integrate a white school. Ruby was smart. She was one of the only Black students to pass the admissions test for the white schools. Ruby was also brave. She endured months of terrible treatment by the protesters. They were shouting terrible things at her and even throwing things at her day after day, yet she held her head up and went to school. Ruby was resilient. She went through difficult times. She couldn't eat or sleep at times, yet she kept going to school. She never missed one day the whole year. I noticed something at the beginning of my paragraph, and I repeated the phrase that she integrated the school in her neighborhood. I want to change that so that in her neighborhood is not there twice. So I'm going to go back to this the first time I mentioned that, and I'm going to say that she was the first to attend a formerly all-white school in Louisiana, right? Because that was her home state. And that way, in the next sentence, when I say Ruby was chosen to be the first to integrate the school in her neighborhood, I'm not repeating those same words over because the reader kind of gets fatigue listening to the same words. It sounds boring, and it sounds like I didn't reread it and see how it sounded. Okay, so I want you to do the same thing with your introduction. All right, so this is what we're working on today. We're trying to get this essay started, and good luck, everybody, with your introductions.